Inside of me, there are two wolves. One is obsessed with all things fantastical medieval, like Arthurian legends and dragons and fairy knights and pretty much anything Jim Henson or Brian Froud have ever touched. But the other is obsessed with something else, something a little more macabre. Entities of ancient mythos that we as a species cannot help but consistently portray as beautiful, ethereal creatures, in spite of their original depictions being that of hideous, bloated, disease-ridden, putrid nightmares. And I, for one, welcome all iterations. This one, this one, this one, these ones, this one, not this one, but this one, and especially this one. I think by now you've probably guessed what my second obsession is. Denizens of the realm of undeath. Creatures of cursed creation, inhabitants of the hour of highest moon, nightwalkers, cryptids, creeps, bloodsuckers, pests, vilest vermin. When my family came to me with the monumentous task of making our matching Halloween costumes, my first idea was, as it has the tendency to be, vampires. But which? There's far too much media to pull inspiration from. Nosferatu's a biggie, everyone's gone absolutely batty for Count Orlok. Not that I blame them, of course, but that's much too dark and gloomy for myself and my fellow Keep members to pull off convincingly. We need something far lighter in tone to match our silly little guy energy. And who's best known for imbuing characters with silly little guy energy, regardless of their status or stature? Taika Waititi, who, as it just so happens, has worked on a very indie, barely recognizable piece of vampire media that I'm sure you've never heard of. And so, I came to the natural conclusion that my family and I should embody the spirit of these three morons, albeit in attire that is less show accurate and more of a love letter to their usual garb, as my skill set is far inferior to whatever wondrous wizard is responsible for these costumes. In order to save myself some time and effort, I'll be trying my best to make only the necessary costume pieces and supplementing everything else with whatever I or my family have in our wardrobes. Additionally, I have but 1 week to finish 3 costumes, so... My sibling, the Druid, shall be the Nadja of our merry band. Due to the horrors of technology and perhaps my own user error, I have managed to lose most of the footage of my patterning process for everything across the board, which means you'll never understand just how fun it was to draft this corset. I beg you to believe me, Council, when I tell you that I had a thought, scribbled a batwing shape on some paper, and then cut it into corsety panels and found that it just worked. But the world may never see my true genius now. I actually patterned the bits for Nadja's corset and Nandor's cloak at the same time. But all this pattern making footage is in the ether now, never to be seen again. I do prefer to at least show you all how I draft my projects, as I feel it can help encourage folks to be far less intimidated to make their own designs come to life without relying on commercial patterns. But sadly in this case I can only redirect you to my Patreon, where you can find these and all my other patterns for your own use to adjust as you please. My deepest apologies, Council. I'll be using this stretch velvet dress I cobbled together for an Arwen costume as my fashion fabric. It consumes all the light that touches it into a plush inky void. It also consumes all the pet hair that touches it, but that remains persistently visible. To reduce the stretch in the velvet, I'll be backing it with this black fabric from my stash of wizard trash. This is not the last you'll see of this fabric in this video. I pin the velvet panels to their corresponding fabric backing and sew everything together. I can then press every single seam flat and open and then cover them with some very appropriately themed ribbon to form boning channels. I run out of the pretty ribbon a little ways in and finish off the rest with another kind, but keep everything looking sort of symmetrical. That way I can trick people into believing it was an intentional choice and not a direct consequence of being a little trash creature that refuses to buy new things or throw old ones out. Once I've stitched all my boning channels into place, I add a sturdy black ribbon to the waistline and secure it at a few points. It's a minor addition, but it should help my very haphazard shapewear from falling apart at all the seams on the first wear. I finish off the bottom first by sewing some binding to the front and then flipping it all the way over so that you cannot see it from the outside. Then stitch to the back by hand. This allows me to go through only the backing layer of fabric so I can do my very best to give the whole thing a far more seamless look. To avoid accidentally stitching the channels closed, I temporarily pop in the boning as I sew. For the bones of my batwing garment, I'm using a most mystical and ancient arcane material, thick zip tie, which is dirt cheap, incredibly heavy duty, and most importantly, heat moldable. I cut the long strips to size, then sand and round out the edges, leaving them a little longer and skinnier than I usually do to help reinforce the batwing tip shape with something solid so they don't get all saggy. I use my iron to convince my zip ties to be a little less straight, taking extra time to really bend the boning that will help the hip bits jut out a bit more from the waist. I then finish off the corset with binding at the top, hand stitch in some silver eyelets along the back, and for a little extra fanciness, chop up some old costume jewellery to make this little tiered hanging beaded bit that connects to the subtle thread bars I embroidered along the front seams so that I can detach it whenever the mood takes me. She'll need a fancy cravat to disguise the very modern shirt I'll be dressing her in. To make it, I fold a scrap of crinkly white fabric in half and cut out a flat, rounded triangular shape. To keep things nice and flowy, I finish off the bottom with a scalloped stitch and cast away the remnants into the depths of my little fabric scraps bucket. I can then pin some pretty pleats into my mass of fabric and sew them onto a little collar, which is just a Druid neck circumference sized piece of scrap fabric folded in half and stitched at the sides. Once all that's combined, I add a little silver button on one end, a little braided loop of elastic on the other, and use a lighter to tidy up the decorative edge of the fabric. To quite literally tie it all together, I cut a length of velvet ribbon and tie it into a little bow over top. Now, I lost most of this circle skirt footage, which is frustrating because, as irony would have it, once again, this is the best skirt I have ever made. Since I have no footage of how I did things for the base, I'll just explain what I did beyond cutting out a big circle with a smaller circle on the inside. Since I'll be keeping this particular item for my own wardrobe, it needs to be adjustable so that it can fit on my sibling's body, which is a much different shape from mine, while also being able to accommodate my personal body fluctuations. So the front ties in with some lacing and the back ties on with a bow sash. I also added in nice big pockets. Once the base of the skirt is done, I hang it for its crimes for about 5 days on our mannequin friend, who, thanks to this comment, is henceforth dubbed Lady Mannequin, official dress form of the keep. I use the rest of the skirt fabric to cut long strips, roughly the width of a Halloween-appropriate tabletop RPG and roughly the length of my entire bloody house. I do a little test on a wee scrap and then finally get to try out my gathering foot to compact all of this into a single massive ruffle. Once all that was once smooth is now a gargantuan strip of decadence, I can then pin and finally attach it to the bottom of the skirt. At this point, I'm running out of time and having a little baby panic attack, so I'll leave zigzagging off that seam and hemming this garment for another day, which marks this costume, at least for now, complete. The ranger, my partner, shall be our Nandor de Laurentis. My original design did feature a cloak, which I bought the fabric and trim for and everything, but once it arrived I couldn't stand the texture, and didn't have enough of it to make a full cloak anyway, so I decided instead to just work incredibly hard on making this sort of roughly Ottoman-esque gambeson tunic coat thingy he typically wears, and base my design mainly off this image. I made the pattern the same way I did in a prior video, which has slightly less missing footage than the one you're watching right now, so you should probably go watch that one after. Once my pattern pieces exist, I can cut into the stunning cotton jacquard to get my main body panels. It's a rather thin fabric, so my thought is to quilt it to add some good weight and make it look a little more luxe. Speaking of luck, by some bizarre stroke of it, I have just enough cotton batting to quilt up the body panels with surprisingly minimal piecing shenanigans. Good news for my partner, bad news for my undying love of cotton batting. The black cotton fabric I used as lining before makes a special appearance here as interior fabric for this garment as well. Once my body panels are all cut out, I prep for quilting by trying to pin all of the fabric evenly together so that there is as little shifting as possible. This is the largest piece I've ever quilted, so I'm doing my very best to be thorough. Now I can mark in my quilting lines. I just go for long stripes vertically about a ruler's width apart, then it's just a simple trip to the sewing machine to sew along every line forever. As it turns out, my pins did little to dissuade my fabric from shifting and warping. So it's patchwork time. I fill in any batting voids with leftover scraps and then cover whatever needs must with some scraggly fabric bits, folding in the edges to create patches. I can then sew along the quilt lines to hide my stitches so that no one on the outside world will ever be any the wiser. Oh, my lining looks like ragged cobblestone roads. Where? I can't see it from where I'm standing. Now I can start combining the main body. I sew all the sides together and finish off the inside with something that I tell myself is called a felled seam. I lie to myself a lot, actually. Binding time, which isn't quite as bad on this garment since it's mainly all straight lines. For the armholes, I use the binding as normal so that there's a pop of contrast at the shoulders, but for all the other seams, I use the same Heidi bias method I used on the bat corset. I really like the little ridge this gives the whole coat. It's just generally very pleasant for me to fondle, either with my eyeballs or my grabby little fingers. For closures, I want to use these lovely suede leather scraps that match my bias binding. I've been meaning to get back into leatherwork since my arguably tragic endeavour on my lember sleeves, and this was a very sweet and simple way to get stuck in again. I whip up the speediest little pattern and cut out 4 sets of each. I then poke a gratuitous amount of holes and use my rivets to attach my closures to the coat, but hide a snap closure on one end. The last addition I wish to add to this terrific top are some removable sleeves. I use this old airline blanket as batting since I'm out of the good cotton stuff. Now it's just a matter of quilting the sleeves all up, binding the edges, and then adding in some hand-sewn eyelets to the sleeve caps. I also make some rectangular inserts and punch equal holes into those. Back at the sewing machine, I secure them in a little ways before the armholes start so that the sleeves can slot comfortably into the coat when laced in. Incredibly last minute, I decided to add in some arm coverings, which I make by wrapping some faux leather that I am desperate to be rid of around my partner's arm. Armed with an awl, I pierce a million yucky little holes on either end and then have the marvellous idea to lace them up with some elastic thread, which was pretty genius if I say so myself, because they can just slide on and off and don't require any lacing at all. In fact, these little braces took all of 10 minutes to make and actually ended up tying the whole look together perfectly. I think I'd like to make another set of braces in the same vein, but with far better materials in future. I do have the pattern after all. That aside, we're done with Nandor's costume now. In order to transform myself into the meek and helpful little familiar we all know and love, I'll need quite a lot of pieces. A button-up shirt, a pair of tan pants, an old man sweater, a pair of shoes that says I have tasks to accomplish but don't wish for my vampire roommates to make fun of my dress code any more than they already do, and to top it all off, an uncharacteristically cool trench coat. Where'd all this come from? Oh, right. I barely need to make or thrift anything to become Guillermo, because these are just my clothes. Apparently, the only thing standing between me and my full polymorph of a soft-spoken descendant of Van Helsing day to day is a pair of hiking gloves and some glasses, plus a few of the Archwizard's personal belongings to ward off the undead. Sorry, Mum. The only thing I'll actually be cobbling together are some wooden stakes to threaten my hubby with. To make these, we fish around the garage for an appropriately sized piece of wood and saw it in not so half. We then have a lot of fun hacking the ends into rough points with a machete. I then teleport back to my bedroom so I can wage war with my wood whittling knives and some sandpaper just until I don't feel any snags anymore. Then it's just layers and layers and layers of some watered down burnt umber acrylic, making sure to add more concentrated dollops to the top and bottom to make it look a little bit more grungy and old. To complete my costume, I stuff a kit bag with some bubble wrap and cast disguise trash with a scrap of fabric. This way I can prop up my copy of Dracula, my wooden stakes and my religious iconography to complete my cosplay of our favourite little vampire fanboy, marking the end of both the easiest and final costume on my docket. Before I can cut to the grand unveiling, however, I have one final menial task to complete. The two of you and your fuzz somehow both remain the banes of my physical existence, as well as the sweetest little itty-bitty cretins that I simply couldn't live without. Now we can move on to the reveal. costumes, I have a tendency to keep things rather simple. This is for two reasons. First and most obvious being that they are far easier to conjure up, but the second is because I really like making pieces that could be used for multiple different events and costumes. I don't love the idea of owning lots of clothing that I or the folks I make things for never actually get the chance to wear. This makes it a bit of a struggle to strike a balance between garb that is visually interesting and full of texture, pattern, and colour, while still being nondescript enough to go with several different costumes or themes. It is also the biggest thing that keeps me from weathering my clothing pieces, something I know I should do, but fear with all my little wizard heart, for I may reduce the wearability or lifespan of the garment. Why am I telling you this, Council? Well, that's because I feel I could have added more details to these costumes. I don't feel like I pushed myself far enough out of my comfort zone. Luckily, I can just add more details when I need or want to, but I can't help but be a little disappointed that I didn't push myself a little further. Oh well, there will be plenty more costumes in the much later future to force growth upon my tentatively sprouting skills, but for now I'm happy with the work I've put in and the way the base garments have come out. Now, I'm going to take a week off and then tackle some very simple projects till the year is up. But don't you worry, I have some very exciting spellcrafts on the horizon very soon after. Cheerio! What an emotional rollercoaster this video was to work on. I've never lost this much footage before, all because of some Google Drive upload error mix-up. I hope you still found the video enjoyable, at least. Thank you to my Wizard Council! These are the wonderful works of the fair folk who support this channel, and they are outstanding, brilliant, the absolute moment. I've recently discovered the chat function over on Patreon, and have really been loving having a spot to give live updates on what I'm up to, or get some quick feedback, or see what you lot are doing, or occasionally just spout a little nonsense. Or, you know, whine about my allergies. It's springtime at the bottom of the world and I'm feeling a little stuffy. Oh, as evidence that you are directly contributing to this channel's overall improvement, I am pleased to announce that I have been saving up our keep funds and have finally purchased this fandangled second-hand video camera. It is a far improvement from my phone, and it should help us avoid any more lost footage in future. So a huge thank you from the bottom of my wee little wizard heart. Other than that, as mentioned before, I shall be taking a very short holiday, just to get all my ducks in a row for next year. I've got schemes cooking, and I just want to figure out a way to make it all work. Well, that's it for now. Thank you all for your visit to the keep, my lords, and I'll see you when I get back.